I'm delighted to see everybody at this semi-annual Sidney Krum Young Artists Concert Series. I'm Jonathan Brent. I'm the Executive Director of the YIVO Institute, and boy, I can see you're an enthusiastic crowd. This is going to be a good concert. There are a lot of people to thank, and foremost among them is our artistic director, Yuval Waldman, who selects the musicians from top music conservatories in the New York area. He coaches them, and there is a lot to coach. These young performers are not just playing notes on a page, they're playing Jewish music. And this requires background and knowledge and understanding of what this music is, the way it was played, just as if you read a story by Sholem Aleichem, you have to have some understanding of the Jewish culture that lies behind those stories. And so what Yuval Waldman does is coach these young professionals not only in playing the music properly, but in understanding the music. And that's the greatest single thing that these concerts are aimed at, which is education. Education of young musicians and education of our audience, of people who rarely get to hear these pieces because they're rarely performed. It's a most important and vital component of YIVO's activities in our various programs now in outreach and educational outreach, which is to take materials from our archives. And I should note that all of the music that is being played, that you're hearing this evening, is coming from our archives. This is music that we've collected, music that is meaningful to us as an institution, and it's part of our heritage. So that we are trying to combine an opening up of our rich musical tradition with the training and the teaching of young cohorts of musicians who will have this now embedded in their memory and part of their professional repertoire. I want to thank very much Carol Constrauss, International Director of the Leo Baeck Institute, for co-sponsoring this and for being a generous and warm supporter of this particular concert. We've gone a little bit out of the box of traditional Jewish understanding of the Jewish world because we've allowed the Yekes to come in, or they feel overrun by the Ostjuden. I don't know which it is, but nevertheless, this is a wonderful example of the kind of collaboration that we hope here to see more of. I want to thank Lyudmila Sholachova for helping prepare these materials and also for helping to prepare the musicians for today's event. And of course, I want to thank all of the young musicians whom you will see later. But now it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce Carol Constrauss, who will say a couple words of welcome. Thank you.
Yes, just a couple of words. And of course, the first is that we are enormously thrilled to be part of this YIVO collaboration, especially since really all we had to do was appear and listen to wonderful music. But several of my LBI members did make one comment when they were invited to a concert that said, Jewish composers, a German connection. They said, excuse me, Mendelssohn, Mahler, Schoenberg, were they Jewish composers or were they German composers? Would you say that George Gershwin and Leonard Bernstein and Aaron Copland are American composers, or would you say they are Jewish composers? So this dichotomy between Jewish and German really actually wasn't a fact until 1935 and the Nuremberg laws. Before that, they were actually German composers. And that's what they were self-acknowledged, and also, the fact is that they were raised Protestant, they were raised Catholic, several of them were not even Jewish. That having been said, it's wonderful to know that the Jewish culture, the German culture, was extremely important to Jews in music, in art, in literature, in philosophy, and that this connection really was severed with great difficulty, and the fact that it really couldn't be severed is indicated by the fact that German Jews, as in Jews in Germany, are once again thriving. And let me just say that we have the editor of the Jewish Voice from Germany, the English language newspaper, Raphael Seligman, with us today. So it just, yeah, right. So it just shows that, this culture, which really historically has been of a piece, is once again, a very important part of both our history and heritage. And of course, the connection with the Ostjuden has also been historical and interconnected for centuries. And anyone who tries to make nice, neat borders between us, it doesn't work, not even in the Center for Jewish History. So it's a great pleasure for us to be part of this. Thank you, gentlemen.
Now, it gives me pleasure to introduce Yuval Waldman.
I think what Carol said about the German and Jewish composers is exactly what we are going to talk about today. Because even those composers who were either born Jewish, of Jewish origin, and had to convert mostly for career reasons, they were considered by others, by Germans, they always were thought of as Jews, regardless of their religion. And even when they protested, it didn't help them much. In case of Mendelssohn, who was Protestant and really the height of German culture, Richard Wagner said, he infiltrated and debased German culture. And Mendelssohn really didn't know what Wagner was talking about. But Wagner was not really debased, but you'll hear today even, when you hear music by Mendelssohn, all throughout it, they're Jewish tunes. They are dressed in classical, romantic harmonies. But the famous violin concerto, the quartet you'll hear today, if you take away their harmonies, they sound like cantorial music, which is amazing. And Wagner was aware of that. Anyway, the most important thing is that in German culture, the Jews did not participate in German culture until Moses Mendelssohn, the grandfather of Felix Mendelssohn, who was considered, he was called the German Socrates, philosopher, and he basically came with the idea, he said, you can, we have this rich culture around us, we practice rich religion, so why not do the best of both? We can be Jews at home and citizens outside. And that's exactly what he did, and hundreds and thousands of young Jewish intellectuals have joined the German mainstream, studied in schools, participated in the culture, and of course, only a few years after Moses Mendelssohn came with this idea, they had Giacomo Meyerbeer, who was born in, he was 1791. Giacomo Meyerbeer became the most famous opera composer in Europe. He was born Meyerbeer, he was son of a rabbi. And of course, Felix Mendelssohn immediately after him. So all the music that you hear today is the Jewish composers that partook richly in German culture, either by being part of it, or studying in Germany, or using the Jewish German organizations to promote Jewish music. You'll see the whole spectrum of all that. And they all kind of connected. And of course, they had, if they wanted to be professional musicians in Europe, they had no choice because German musical culture was the musical culture in Europe. You're talking about Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, etc. They're all product of German musical culture. So we basically, good chronologically, we do from Mendelssohn, and we'll finish our program with Israeli composer who was born in Saarbrücken, came as a young man to Palestine at the time, Israel, and studied in Germany and became honorary citizen of Saarbrücken as a grown maestro. So it's like full circle. You have Russian musicians who performed and worked and lived in Germany. Anyway, so it's kind of interesting connection. The first piece is a movement from a quartet by Mendelssohn, who wrote when he was 18 years old. Amazingly, it's a beautiful piece. And you listen to the theme of the quartet, and you'll tell me if you see what I mean about being like a Jewish tune. But it's very much Mendelssohn with a light scherzo in the middle. So let's invite our quartet. They're very, very talented young people who graduated from Juilliard, Manhattan School of Music, and they are the pride of American musical education, and they are the great artists of the future. So. The next piece is very special. We found it in the archives of the Leo Baeck Institute, the Music Institute, and is, as far as I know, the only piece that Lewandowski wrote for violin. Lewandowski is well known as a cantorial composer of music for synagogue, and actually he's the musical founder of the Reform musical service, and his music is sang in temples all over the world, and even conservative and even Orthodox temples who generally do not have instrumental music, they use some of his melodies in their service. So Lewandowski came to study in Berlin, and interestingly enough, to make the connection, Mendelssohn was the one who helped him and recommended him to the Berlin Conservatory because it was very difficult, as I said, for Jews to get in. And Mendelssohn, despite being Protestant, was very interested in helping Jewish musicians. And Lewandowski really owes his musical career to Mendelssohn. So this is his own arrangement of Kol Nidre. Everyone knows the basic tune, and it's a very beautiful arrangement, and I do not know if it was ever performed in New York. I'm not aware of it, so it might be the first performance. And Arthur and Alla will perform it. The next piece is very rarely performed, Piano Quartet by Mahler. Mahler, of course, was a major symphonic composer. He wrote this piano quartet when he was first year in an Academy of Music, 16 years old, not quite 16. And it's probably his first chamber music piece. The interesting thing, talking about conversion, when he wrote it, he was Jewish. He converted later. And again, he had to struggle to get into Academy of Music because he was Jewish, but he was incredibly talented, he was accepted, and Mahler has distinction being, he grew up listening to klezmer music. There were klezmer bands passing left and right, and it kind of became part of his musical memory. His like, Madeleine for Proust. Constantly, in all his symphonies, every single symphony, there is a lot of Wagner, there is a lot of Bruckner, and there's always klezmer music in different guises. And I think it's probably the first composer and one of the very few that used klezmer music in a symphonic classical literature. And I think it's kind of amazing. This particular piece is totally influenced by Wagner. It's a very romantic, young, very powerful expression of a young man. Unusual piece for piano quartet. the next two pieces, they're miniature piano pieces. They're very short each. They're walled apart. The first one is by Anton Rubinstein, who was the romantic lion of Russian music, but all his training and most of his concert career was in Germany. He was friendly with Mendelssohn, with Schumann, with Liszt, and actually he lived in Germany for many years, and then the opportunity arose for him to do something unusual, so he convinced the wife of a Tsar to sponsor first professional school of music in St. Petersburg. Until middle of 19th century, there were no full-time professional musicians in Russia. So that became, not only it was a school, it became one of the very best schools in the world. And 20th century, the great names of piano and violin that we know, they're products of that school. Heifetz, Elman, many others. He had ambiguous relation with Judaism. His parents, converted to make it possible for him to have a career, actually. But he was never fully accepted. So he was saying, in Germany, they call me Russian. In Russia, they call me Jewish. So anywhere he went, he was always the other one. And he suffered greatly because of that. But he developed tremendous fascination with the Jewish history. And he wrote a number of operas with biblical subjects and short pieces with his idea of Judaic influence, which was, in his mind, oriental, anything oriental, which we consider mostly like Arab or Turkish or something. That was, to him, Judaica. So he wrote this very short piece. It's called Marche, orientale, and it's basically, you can see a musical painting of a caravan, oriental caravan with camels and stuff, coming through desert from far away, and then comes very close, and then goes away. That's a little painting. Now, the second piece was Arnold Schoenberg. Arnold Schoenberg was a German composer, totally part of the Romantic education, great admirer of Wagner, but he decided, he was a great intellectual, he decided that Romantic music couldn't go any further. It would just become too big, too long, too complicated. And so he decided to create a new system in music, which instead of having one center, one note being center of the scale, every note would be independent, democratic scale, where every note was full rights. And he created what he called musical row, which are little musical scales, which, and then he would reverse them. He would basically do a geometric study with them. But the spirit of the music is still German Romantic, which is really interesting. So this particular piece, Gavotte, is from a suite. It's a parody on Baroque music, and also has hidden scale, name of Bach, B, A, C, and H, which in German means lowered, B flat. So if some of you can follow it, it would be great. It's hard, but it's there. Anyway, it would be interesting to hear those two very opposite piano pieces, and Alla will play them. And so we are going to hear two songs arranged for violin, kind of in piano, very unusual. People know this piece, but few people know that Kurt Weill wrote also a great deal of Jewish liturgical music and a theater piece. I think it was called The Long Road, about history of Jewish people. And so he was always very involved in it while writing theater music. So those are two songs, Polish song and a Ballade of Immoral Earnings, very appropriate for our days.
Wonderful. Never knew that Kurt Weill could sound so good on violin. It's very unusual. The next two pieces are by, one is by Russian Jewish composer, Russian-Israeli composer actually, who spent time performing and living in Berlin for years. And the other one, Israeli composer who was born in Berlin actually, and changed his name.
Joel Engel was one of the founders of the Jewish Folk Music Society in Russia, and was sent to Berlin to promote the music written by the composers of this society. And he founded in Berlin music publishing house called YIVO, like my first name. He was first musician in the Bible. And they published huge amount of Jewish music. He organized hundreds of concerts, composed a lot. So a very, very intense few years. Then he immigrated to Palestine and became the father of Israeli classical music. So the Freilach, it's a klezmer wedding dance that he composed based on Jewish folk music. Paul Ben Chaim was born, a different name, yeah. He was born as Paul Frankenberger. That was his original name in Germany, and became a well-known composer, conductor, very involved in the musical life in Germany. And of course, when Nazis came to power, he immigrated to Palestine, changed his name to Paul Ben Chaim, and changed his area of interest into oriental music. He had a Yemenite singer, Bracha Tzfira, who taught him about Yemenite music, and he was very involved in it. So his music is what we call Middle Eastern, Mediterranean. But of course, his training, very rigorous musical training, was German. So it was really combined in all his music. And he's probably the best known Israeli composer, performed all over the world, winner of Israel Prize. So those are the two pieces you'll hear now. The last piece of the program is the most contemporary of these composers that we are going to play. Tzvi Avni, very well-known Israeli composer, whose music is performed a great deal in Germany, probably more, his music is more performed in Germany than it is in Israel. And he was born in Saarbrücken, came to Palestine as a young boy, studied with Paul Ben Chaim, studied the German tradition of harmony, contrapoint, and also very involved in Middle Eastern music, also electronic music, and he was awarded a title of honorary citizen of Saarbrücken, and he is very, very highly respected in Germany. It's kind of interesting. I was looking for some information about his biography, and I had a very difficult time to find it in English, but a lot in German on the internet. So anyway, this is the last piece. It's prayer. It's basically a meditative piece with an intense dance in the middle, then finishes again as a prayer. So thank you very much for coming today, and I hope you enjoy this last piece with the string quartet, and I hope to see you in our future concerts next year. Thank you.